Hello everyone, welcome. This is going to be lesson number 3 of Beginner's Java. I've set up the project this time before you guys join, so I'm going to do that from now on. In the event you ever need to set up a new project, it's just File, New, Project, and when you create a class, it's Source, you right-click, and you go to New Java Class. Okay, so cool. We talked about a few things last video. We talked a lot about numbers and values and adding them. What we didn't talk about a lot was strings. And in our first video, we did a lot of chatting about, how to add and subtract strings and how to do things like that. And I didn't get too into how addition and subtraction and stuff works and order of operations, so I'm going to get into that this video a little bit. So a few things. Let's start by covering order of operations, just because it's sort of the last number thing that I didn't do. So if I say int a equals 1, there's a few things I can do here. So if I do a++, what do you think is going to happen here? So I'm going to say system.out.println a. What do you think this value is going to be? Any guesses? Alright, so when I do that, it's going to take a second to build, and when it runs, I get 2. So when I say plus plus after a value, that means add it immediately at the end of this line. If I do plus plus before, it means do this immediately. And there's very little difference between the two. There's going to be very few times where you'll ever see somebody do plus plus a. It's just very much more natural to see a plus plus. And this can be any name. You can change this, again, to number. You can change this to anything. I just chose a. So another thing, so now that we know that that's 2 right there, so this is called incrementing. So there's another way you can do this, and this is the exact same thing. So we can do a equals a plus 1, or the simpler way to write that I'm not going to do that. We'll just do a plus equals 1. So all of these are the exact same as a plus plus. When a plus plus is only adding a 1. These two are always going to be the same. So, for example, let's create a second value. Let's create int b equals 10. Cool. So let's drag these down. Leave those comments up at the top, like that. So right now we know that a equals 2. And so if we're going to do a plus equals b, should be 12, right? And so we run this, and we can see that it's 12. But what happens if we do b divided by 5 plus 1? Actually, let's do b divided by 4 plus 1. So some of you people are going to say, okay, well, 2 divided by 4 is equal to 1/2, or I'm sorry, 10 divided by 4 is equal to 2.5, plus 1 is 3.5. So that's going to be 5.5, which you can't possibly put into an integer. And if that's what you're going to say, then I have some bad news for you. So when we end up doing a division with integer, it rounds down. So that's the first takeaway. Now, if we want this to be a little bit different, and we want to do that 4 plus 1 first, we can just put it in parentheses. So the math rules in code are the exact same as they are in normal mathematics. So that means we need to do two things. Division, because multiplication, if you're using integers, you're only multiplying by whole integers. If there would be an, or not an integer, I'm sorry, a decimal, it gets dropped. And it doesn't matter if the number is 5.9, it doesn't round it to 6, it rounds it down to 5. It takes the floor. So the base number is what you're left with. And the order of operations, oops, is the same as math. So it's P for parentheses, E for exponents, M/D, multiplication and division, and this is just going to be parentheses. And then add, subtract. And so you'll notice that I put a slash in between these. Multiplication, division, add, subtract. They're at, so those two, M/D and A/S, are equal. So that means that it actually, if it sees division before multiplication, it handles the division first. If it sees multiplication, etc. But those are handled left to right, meaning if we have 9 divided by 3 times 2, or let's actually do something better. 12 divided by 3 times 2, this has 2 possible values, right? So if we do 12 divided by 3 equals 4 times 2 is 8, then that's fine, right? What is it? Equals 4 multiplied by 2 equals 8. Great. Or that could equally be 12 divided by 6 equals 2, right? Or, I'm sorry, yeah. So those are the 2 options. This is the correct one. And we'll say this is wrong. And that's not just in Java, that's just in real life. That's not how math works. But it's especially important to know if you're going to be a programmer. A lot of people overstate how much math is in programming. You don't need... Okay, let me back up. There are certain jobs where you will need an absurd amount of math. I worked with a guy who, he actually built like 3D radar imaging arrays for a defense contractor, and you know, he had a very hardcore job where he had to know linear calculus and all this other stuff. For most jobs, you don't need to know that much math. You need to know how to put 2 numbers together. You need to know how to calculate sales tax. Maybe you need to know an interest calculation, but that's about it. So okay, that's what I wanted to start off with here. Now, something else we can do is we can add strings together, very similarly using this kind of notation, that plus equals notation. Or we can just do the sort of uglier notation like that. So let's say we have a string, oops, and we'll call it hello, and we'll just say it equals hello. Very simple, right? Let's say we want to be really taboo and we want to add world to it. So we say hello, we can say equals hello plus world, just like that. And I'm going to comment that line out just because this is a bit easier. Hello plus equals world, just like that. And these two lines are exactly the same thing. It's just a lot simpler to type plus equals, especially since plus equals are on keys right next to each other, so you can really, it's very efficient for typing. Okay, and so then when we do a system.out.println, we do hello, it does, again, exactly what you think it does, and it prints out hello world. Now, just to continue getting you guys pretty familiar with the Java docs, I'll do system.out.println, and when we, no, I don't want that, I want the actual, no, I don't want that, I want the actual Java docs for system. So when I do the Java docs for system, there are actually a lot of, there's a bunch of different stuff in here. One of the things we see is out, and so if we do out.println, we see a whole bunch of different stuff that we can go to here. The one that we use predominantly is string. And so when we go here, what that means is it prints a string and then ends the line. And we provide it a string. So that's what's in between these parentheses, is a string. So whenever we have a variable in between parentheses like this, it's called an argument. And all an argument does is it tells a method what to use within the method. And so a method is a stored set of procedures. And we'll get more into methods in about another 10 to 15 episodes. Those come a little further down the line. So for now, it's just good to know what these things are so you kind of understand what's going on. It's a little less just rote memorization, and now you kind of have a feel for what these things are and what they're doing. Alright, I'm going to wrap this up here. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to reach out. This is Damien with Beginners Java. This has been lesson number 3. And I'm going to show you guys one more time how to commit. It's very simple. I'm not going to include the idea files, just the source files. And I'm just going to put the commit message to lesson 3 source code. And when I've done that, I'm going to commit and push. And when I commit and push, that is going to show up over here on GitHub. And so when I come over here to GitHub, go to lesson 3, inside of source, there's lesson 3, with all of our code and comments and everything else in there. So, alright, thanks for watching everyone. Bye-bye.